Good evening. Welcome to Deep Gospel, everybody. I'm Haley. I'm the Assistant Director at Campus City Wesley, or Associate Director. I don't know. Titles are meaningless. I do stuff, and I think it's a good thing. And then we also have Sydney with us. Sydney is an Assistant Director of Worship and Culture. And so she certainly does a lot to lead our band and lead worship. She has been gearing up for our next Evolve. So I think this episode airs right after Evolve has happened. So right now she's stressed out about it. And when everybody watches, she's going to be in that blissful, we made it through and everything was wonderful and it's great. So we also have Jenny, who's one of our interns, and she lives at our residential housing, which is just 3 doors down from me in the neighborhood over here. And then Jess is one of our young adult volunteers, an alumni, and a very tired teacher of 4th graders. And anything you want to add to that, Jess?
That about sums it up.
I'm really enjoying hearing about your class and everything that you're willing to share on social media and stuff, and excited about what you get to do with them, and excited that we still get a chance to have your voice in the community every now and then. So would you mind grounding us in prayer, Jess, before we talk about our passage?
Yeah, of course. Dear God, I know that you know this, but we have a lot on our hearts right now. Just everything that continues to happen in our world and in our personal lives, and yet you're still there. So I just pray that we continue to feel your presence, and your presence fights to continue to be felt. And I pray that the conversation that we have today allows us to deeper feel that presence. So just thank you so much for allowing us all to be here in this moment and for you. Amen.
Yes. Sydney's going to read our scripture passage. We're continuing in Matthew. So Sydney, you'll take it away.
Yes. I am reading Matthew 22, 1 through 14. I will be reading it in CEB. And this is the parable of the wedding party, a very interesting one this week. Starting in verse 1. Jesus responded by speaking again in parables. The kingdom of heaven is like a king who prepared a wedding party for his son. He sent his servants to call those invited to the wedding party, but they did not want to come. Again, he sent other servants and said to them, "Tell those who have been invited, look, the meal is all prepared. I've butchered the oxen and the fattened cattle. Now everything's ready. Come to the wedding party." But they paid no attention and went away, some to their fields, others to their businesses. The rest of them grabbed his servants, abused them, and killed them. The king was angry. He sent his soldiers to destroy those murderers and set their city on fire. Then he said to his servants, "The wedding party is prepared, but those who were invited weren't worthy. Therefore, go to the roads on the edge of town and invite everyone you find to the wedding party." Then those servants went to the roads and gathered everyone they found, both evil and good. The wedding party was full of guests. Now, when the king came in and saw the guests, he spotted a man who wasn't wearing wedding clothes. He said to him, "Friend, how did you get in here without wedding clothes?" But he was speechless. Then the king said to his servants, "Tie his hands and feet and throw him out into the farthest darkness. People there will be weeping and grinding their teeth." Many people are invited, but few people are chosen. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
Thanks be to God. I feel like I'm saying that somewhat half-heartedly this week because this is a very, very tough parable. In fact, I was trying to read some articles to prepare, and one of the ones that I look up from time to time suggested that if a preacher has the opportunity to choose one of the 3 other passages selected for that week, like the Psalm or the Epistle or the Old Testament, he would recommend that versus trying to wrestle with this passage. So that's kind of where we're at. But we try to start positive with the things we liked about this passage. And I am actually going to say that I did not like anything in this passage this week. I'm very hesitant to kind of go deeper into those things I like without the challenge. So I am ceding my time over to Jenny, who I'm sure has a much more positive outlook than I do.
Okay, so this was probably, okay, out of all the parables, this one was the hardest one for me to understand, I guess. I mean, in small groups, last week, we read the parables of the vineyard workers, and that one can be somewhat understood. It took me a while, but I feel like this one is a little bit harder to understand. What I liked about it is that how the king really wanted people to come to his son's wedding. Like, he went ahead and told his servants, like, "Hey, go ahead and invite people. I want to share this moment with them," and they didn't want to come. So then, as a way to persuade them, he told them, like, "Oh, I'm gonna have this meals and this, like, everything that he was gonna have at the wedding, like everything that was gonna be displayed." But so that shows that he really wanted to have guests at his son's wedding. And not only he wanted people there just like as an audience, he wanted to share with them like as actual guests. So that was like throughout the Bible, weddings are probably one of the most important moments in one's lifetime. And even outside the Bible, in different cultures, wedding is one of the most important moments in one's lifetime. So he wanted to share that moment with a lot of people, and I'm assuming he didn't know those people that he invited. He just wanted to share with whoever was out there, not just him and his servants. So I mean, that was very selfless of him. I mean, if you think about it now, usually rich people's parties are like so small, like it's only like their own class. That's what I've noticed. Hispanic weddings, especially in rural areas, people like to share that moment with everyone in the village or everyone that they know, so they get really packed. That's kind of how I interpreted it. And where was it? Had it up here. Okay, so it says that when they went ahead and when the servants went ahead and sold everything that was gonna have in the feast, so the king was gonna have in the feast, those people got mad and actually mistreated the servants and killed them. So the king actually got upset and he avenged his servants. So I mean, if you think about it, the king actually being so angry about it, like he had to avenge his own servants. That shows that he cares about their servants more than just their servants, like as people. he wanted to make justice for their servants. Many people who have like maids and butlers and servants for them nowadays, or I mean, not nowadays, but throughout history, they just didn't care about them. They just like, oh well, they died. I'll just get another servant. I'll just hire someone else. I don't care. Even in the corporate world, it's like that. They just don't. It's a big argument that people make that like, oh, you're so loyal to your boss, and at the end of the day, they don't care about you. So the king actually did. He cared about his servants, so he went ahead and avenged them. So I guess you can say overall what I like. My main point is that I like that the king was very sharing, I guess. Very caring, very sharing. He wanted to share that moment with everyone, and he also cared for his servants. So it wasn't like, so I only want to share this moment with people within the circle. It was like, I want to share this moment with everyone. Everyone should. I don't see why people shouldn't come. So that's what I got from it. That's what I liked about it.
Thanks, Jenny. I love that perspective, and I especially love kind of sharing a little bit about like the liveliness of like Hispanic weddings and just kind of the lavishness that this wedding sounded like, being so like openly shared in that way. I think that adds some good texture for us. Jess, what about you? What did you like in our passage?
So he uses the word friend. That's about all that I got. But then he kind of yeets him. So okay. So I kind of like, this is what I kind of like, but I don't know if I like it. Like, I haven't made a final decision because I need to hear Haley speak some truth so I can make sure my frame is correct. But so what I like is that, yes, it did take a while for the king to be inclusive and invite everyone. But as far as like framing it for us, we should always be prepared to be invited by God. Like, we should always, even if we don't feel that we have a calling at this very moment, we should always be preparing ourselves to step into a space that we're being invited to by God. So I like that. If that applies, if it doesn't apply, then friend, that's what I got. But
did you say that he yeets them?
It's a verb. I'm around
Doing my age
10-year-olds all day, so
understand. Okay, yeah. Sydney, what about you? What did you like about our parable?
Yes. I need more context. Like, I know that in order to get into the good stuff of this parable, I need more historical context, more language context, because this one's definitely hard. But I do like this imagery of the king sending his servants to invite everyone, the evil and the good, and who is evil, who is good, what I mean? We can talk about it, but like, just this idea that like the king was inviting everyone. And so there's more, obviously, as we get deeper into it, there's more to talk about. Okay, many are invited, but few, what does it say at the end? Few are chosen. I don't know what this means, honestly, but I do know that I'm here for this invitation, this everyone's welcome to the celebration, that the king wants as many people as possible. But I also know that I'm definitely missing something here. This is one of these parables that I'm like, I don't know if this works in my context. You know what I mean? Like, I need their context, I think, to understand what this is saying. So, yeah, I'm definitely struggling with it, like y'all, for sure.
Well, then I think it's appropriate to turn to the challenges. I think that's where the richest discussion comes anyway. So I'll start with Jenny. Jenny, what were the things that challenged you in this passage?
If I'm being honest, I want to say mostly everything. um, but what challenged me the most, I guess not the last, or the part before the last, starting on verse 11. Um, because someone was at the wedding and he was not wearing a wedding garment. I know that isn't exactly literal. I know the wedding garment probably means like the clothes, the new clothes that we wear in the spirit, like purity and all of that stuff. But the thing I don't get is everyone there pretty much were the ones that were worthy to be there, because it says before the people that were invited, they weren't worthy. So then the other people who were invited and they came in, they were allowed to be there. They were allowed to be there because they were invited, sorry. But they were invited in there, and the king didn't seem to be disturbed or bothered by them. But then this man had no wedding garment, and he asked him like, "How do you get in here without wedding garment?" So I'm wondering, how did he get in there? I mean, like, and what is the more exact symbolism of the wedding garment? Because him not wearing that, it was bad enough for the king to send him to a place of punishment. And then the last verse says, like, for many are called and few are chosen. I guess the last verse 14 is like, well, the belief I grew up in my denomination, if you want to say, we do believe in predestination. Like, everything is, like, we believe that people are predestinated and that the future is predestinated. But the way I think about it is that everything is predestinated, but it's not set in stone. Like, for example, when God would give a prophet like a vision or a dream of something that's gonna come in the future, and then it doesn't happen because I guess people prayed or people decided to come to God the way they should have. So it's just, I guess the future can be, like it says, many are called but few are chosen. Like, things are kind of like, life is kind of set up for us, but it's not exactly 100% set in stone. Like, God can make up his mind. God can become more compassionate. I'm kind of going off topic. When verse 13, when it says the place of weeping and gnashing of teeth, that's one of the I'm gonna go a little dark here. In other verses, I don't remember which one it is, but it says the place of weeping and gnashing of teeth. That's like a description of hell in other verses. So I'm guessing the men without a wedding garment can be a symbol of I guess sin, and people who want to live a sinful life. And then you not wearing a wedding garment means that you're not wearing, you don't have the seal of God, like you're not wearing the garments of the virtues of God. So then pretty much they said like, hey, yeah, this man's going to hell. That's a bit dark. But I mean, that's kind of how I interpreted this. This was,
I mean, I think that it's fair because this is a dark parable. I mean, it is. I think, I really appreciate how close you keep us to the text and like what verses and where we actually see those references. Um, but there are definitely a lot of questions. I want to, before I start responding to these, I want to see what Jess and Sid's challenges are too, because they might overlap and lead to kind of some deeper discussions about those things in particular. So Jess, what about you? What challenged you?
So definitely, like Jenny, like the last part where he calls him friend and he's like, friend, why are you not wearing the correct clothing? Which is after, am I allowed? It pisses me off because he like, okay, he gets rejected. People are not coming. And then he finally gets this one dude come to the door. And then he's like, nah, fam, like go home, but not even go home, like go to hell. Like beggars can't be choosers, king. Pissed. Okay. But then there's also the part of me that's like, okay, because me trying to positively frame things. What if, and then there's the people that don't believe in hell and that believe that earth is hell and what we are living in is hell if it's for eternity. So, okay, bear with me. This is a lot of jumping. What if he sent him into the outer darkness, which is just back outside of the party until he's prepared? And I know that's a really far jump and probably not where I was supposed to go, but what if this isn't an ending of like, okay, this dude didn't fit the description, so we're throwing him into hell? What if it's he's not ready yet and we're gonna wait to let him in when he's ready? So maybe that, maybe not. But then there's also there's this, and this is also being brought up in an evangelical fun world of where we were always told like you have to continuously prove that you're worthy of being there. So the whole, just because you got invited, you're stepping into the space, and if you are not keeping up with the the Joneses, keeping up with the things that you need to in order to stay invited and stay worthy. So that's what I first got out of this, and then I was like, that cannot be what Jesus is telling me. He cannot be saying, I'm inviting you to this space until you're not worthy anymore. But that's what I'm struggling with in this passage, is where is the great, beautiful invitation that is for everyone? Because it seems very classist and it doesn't feel good. So that's my challenge.
Thanks, Jess. Definitely lots of good things to ponder. Sid, what about you? What didn't you like?
Yeah, that was so good, Jess. So I'm just going to comment on Jess's thing first, and then I'll go on my tangent. I love what you said about, also you're kind of like thinking out of the box. Maybe it's getting, kicked out until you're ready. Now, this is a challenge I have because some of this language I think is conflicting. And again, I'm not a theologian, so take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt. But to me, this is kind of plays into this bigger conversation of, like Jenny was talking about, predestination, free will, these really big conversations. And I think it really gets at that, where with this language of many are invited, few are chosen, as if like it's not anything you can do about being chosen. Like you're either chosen or you're not, which is what that leads me to think, right? Which kind of moves me in this direction of like, our fate is predetermined and there's nothing we can do to change it. But then, like Jess is talking about, there's also all this other language in this parable that leads me to this idea of free will, in the fact that clothing is something we can change, right? He showed up to the party in the wrong clothes and he got kicked out of the party because he could have worn the right clothes. You know what I mean? Like, clothing is something that we have the ability to change. Also, accepting the invitation is something we have the power to do. And so that leads me in this direction of thinking about our free will and God giving us this free will. And that, I mean, that makes me go on a spiral, because you know, like, these are really big conversations of like, that I don't know, I don't have answers to. I'm gonna be honest. I wish I was the kind of person that was like fully convinced that we have, but I'm also a sociologist, so sometimes I'm not convinced that we do, to be honest. But then I also have theological issues in the way that, like, this idea of predestination plays out in people's actions. So I also am not, that feels uncomfortable. So I'm always kind of like living in this weird, like, inner conflict about these really big discussions. So yeah, what was my challenge? The whole thing, the whole parable was very challenging to me. This idea of the king destroying the murderers in the city was kind of like, the king kicking out, you know, it's just all of it was like, I don't know what to do with this. Yeah. Yes, Haley, I'm so excited to hear you comment on all of this madness happening.
I want to continue the conversation about these different elements and kind of break them down a little bit, but I'm going to add one more challenge that I had before we go there. And the challenge that I have with this passage is how do we use it? Like, what is the application? How do we, how do we teach anybody about this? And historically, the way this has been taught is the wedding feast, the wedding banquet, was open to the Jews. Jesus was a Jew. And this passage shows us that all Jews are bad. The Jews killed Jesus, and now the Christians get to take their place. Now, that is how it has been read for centuries, because it's been read from Christians inserting themselves in the center of this passage. And so this leads to very anti-Semitic thoughts that passages like this can be used to do real harm. Like, passages like this can be used by Nazi Germany to legitimize 6 million plus Jews being killed. Because this passage shows us that there's something inherently wrong and unworthy about the Jewish people who would reject Jesus. So what do? Well, I mean, like, what's such a big idea of sending people to a place where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth? Like, and so I don't say these things to make light of them. I say them to, like, show the gravity of taking a passage like this and trying to make simple one-for-one comparisons of who fits this role, who fits that role, and where judgment comes into play, because it can be really, really harmful. I think passages like this can continue to do harm, also still in Jewish communities, because anti-Semitism is still very real. And I just know a lot of people who are Jewish who continue to get comments thrown at them, wishing that they were dead, basically. but we can apply this to other communities that we see on the outside. I think sometimes people will use this to justify what they see as mainline Protestant denominations falling out of favor in height of some other kind of denomination or expression of faith. So anyway, so to add a challenge to just what's in the text, my challenge is also with what do we do with this text, and how do we actually wrestle with it in a way that's not going to harm or bring about unfair judgment on people or communities, that leaves lasting impact. So let's talk a little bit about the feast in general. Unfortunately, I could not find all of my sources before our meeting, but one thing that helped me in talking about this passage is what Jesus is describing loosely actually happened in a foreign land. Now, I can't remember because I couldn't find all of the instructions, but instructions, the history. But in Jesus' living memory, there is a foreign king who is hosting a banquet, and people say they aren't coming, and he kills them. Like, that literally happened in history. So something about that redeems Jesus' imagination for me a little bit, that Jesus isn't trying to come up with, off of the top of his head, this really gruesome scene, but is taking an example that would make a connection to people in his community and saying, hey, remember that thing that happened? Maybe it's kind of like what God is doing here. Still a challenge, but gives us a little bit of context with why he would come up with this example. And then the other thing I think I would love to hear more thoughts about is, like, who are we in the passage? Like, where do you feel invited, convicted, encouraged, concerned? You know, like, what are those things for you? I think passages like this remind me of the weight of the gospel and the urgency of the gospel. And so, while I do not believe in the kind of colonialist view of gospel where, you know, soldiers were literally like, hey, believe in Jesus or I'm going to kill you, I wonder if I have the same amount of urgency to share the good news of Jesus as I can sometimes have about, you know, making sure people know when the new Bachelorette premiere is, or things that are much more trivial in life. So I don't know. Do y'all have thoughts on that? That wasn't a question I had prepared, but when you were reading through and struggling with the story, did you imagine yourself in any places?
I'll jump in. I imagined myself as the guest who was invited after his preferred guests were invited. Like, when I imagined myself in the story, I imagined myself as not the preferred guest, but the guest that gets invited once others decline. And then I imagined myself, yeah, I don't know what that says about how I see myself. But I also just, like, with that, it made me think, okay, well, like, then if I'm showing up because I'm invited, like, would I be wearing the right thing? That's like what I'm imagining, right? I'm this person that showed up in the wrong outfit. Like, would I show up wearing the right thing? And I don't really know actually what that really like, what that means, but that's where I inserted myself in the story. What, I don't know. What about y'all?
I at first would I I have really dark sense of humor sometimes, and I was just like, like that would freaking happen. Like I would finally get invited and then show up and get thrown to hell. Like that would happen, But then part of me also inserted myself with the people that ignored it. Like you get invited and you're like, nah, and then you get invited again and you're like, this must be a joke. Like not that and not because I'm like, oh, I'm so elite. It'd be a joke because I'd be like, you didn't, that was an accident. Like nah, like you're playing a joke. And I would just continuously probably ignore it. So I probably wouldn't have been the guy that showed up. I would have just been the guy sitting at home because I wanted to watch Netflix and I didn't think the invitation was real. So
I think the thing I thought was verse 5. They made light of it and went away. One went to his farm, another to his business, and the rest of them mistreated his slaves. And so I was thinking, I definitely wouldn't be the person who was like lashing out at like poor people who are like just delivering a message. But I could see myself being too busy with something else. I also was really struck by verse 10. Those slaves went out into the streets and gathered all whom they found, both good and bad. So the wedding hall was filled with guests. And I found that section, both good and bad, so interesting that there are a lot of times in scripture where I think people who are misfits get romanticized. The tax collectors and prostitutes and sinners are going to get into heaven first. And that is something Jesus says. And then we have this verse that maybe suggests that like, okay, but like they're not getting in because they're like a prostitute or a tax collector. They're getting in because there's some sort of ability for them to connect to the urgency of the gospel and accept it. And so this is where like that predestination versus free will is so interesting, where I tend to not see myself in the role of judge. I'm not the king. I don't get to throw out people from the off the guest list if I don't think they should be there. But I wonder, like, if I'm supposed to be that friend who says like, hey, do you want to borrow some of my clothes for the party? Like being able to share what I've learned, like who God is in my life, in such a way that makes that preparation accessible for people, whoever they might be. So I don't know. Jenny, what about you? Who would you relate to? I think I caught her right in the middle of someone asking or something.
Yeah, sorry.
We were just talking about who we related to or saw ourselves in the passage.
That is kind of hard to get Um, for sure, I am scared of being the person that wasn't. For sure, I am scared of ending up in the person that wasn't ready. Um, but I can also see myself as one of the people that was invited. I'm not sure if I was one of the people that. I'm not sure if I would fall under the people that attended or the people that were invited but didn't attend. Um, because kind of my interpretation of this is when let's say when your friend invites you to church or a small group, um, so you know right away that someone's sharing the gospel with you. um, that shows you that they believe in God and they want to share that with you. They want you to um, they want to share their beliefs with you. So then you make a choice. Okay, sorry, I wanted to make sure I wasn't muted. um, so you have a choice to make, and no one can force you. So you can choose to go or not to go. It's kind of hard for me to tell which one would I be because I was pretty much born into Christianity. My parents were Christians since I was 2, so I've been going to church all my life. So if it wasn't like that, I don't know. I don't know if I would have. Um, I don't know what type of person I would be. It's kind of hard to tell. Like I don't know if I would be open about it or not. Maybe based on my culture, like where like in my country we're more open than Americans when it comes to Christianity. Even people who are not Christians, they have like this respect for God and this respect for the church. Even if some evangelical pastors have like a reputation of just taking people's money, like people still, it's not like people still have the respect of God. So I think I would probably be one of those people. Uh, but then again, with all this rise in like lack of belief that's been growing, like people questioning or denying the existence of a God, I don't know if I would actually believe it. Um, I don't know if I would probably be leaning towards that either. So I'm not sure which one would I. All I'm trying to say is I'm not sure where I would fall. Probably as one of the people that was invited. I guess depending on where in my life I was when I was invited. Yeah, I guess it would depend on where in my life, like when in my life. Like if I was a child and I was invited, I would have probably said yes. And then now if I was invited, and let's pretend I'm not Christian, I was invited, I would probably be like, I don't know. Probably would have said no. Um, Someone may have been able to convince me to say yes, but I don't know. So yeah, I'm not sure. Definitely someone invited.
Thanks, Jenny.
Oh wait, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, another thing came to my mind. So the servants of the king, when they were the second time they went to invite more guests, they went ahead and were spreading about everything the king was offering at the wedding. Uh, that would have probably persuaded me to go, even if I was thinking about not going. So, yeah, maybe, possibly. Okay, I'm done.
It's a lot to think about, this whole passage. I wonder where we land as far as where we see good news or gospel in this passage. And I'm going to let Jess start us off with what her gospel implication is.
So normally I would have like a clear, this is where I see the gospel and this is where I see Jesus in this passage. But with this one, it's super tricky because for me, it's open-ended. And I know that you're reading it and you're like, well, he got thrown into hell and like, but when I read it, I just don't feel that finality to it. It doesn't, So maybe that's the gospel implication for me, is like, because this is so vague, maybe that's the purpose. And I don't know, maybe I'm reading into that, and I read into everything, but maybe the thing is we don't know. And like Sydney was talking about earlier, there's some language that leans towards predestination, but then there's some language that leads towards free will, and maybe that's the thing. I don't know if anyone's seen, why can I not think of it right now? They say, what the fork? What is that?
The Good Place.
Yes, The Good Place. Okay. And it just reminds me of the scene where everyone's like trying to guess who got it right and who was right about like the afterlife. And he's like, only one dude got it right. But that's how I feel, is that we all have these versions of this parable, but in the end it's going to be like that one random dude that was so specific, and we're all just kind of like, it's bits and pieces of our interpretations. So with that being said, I'm confused.
Thanks, Jess. I'm with you, but I appreciate the opportunity to wrestle together. Sid, what about your gospel implication?
Yes, I think I'm more okay lately. Okay, sorry. I'm trying to get my thoughts in order. So I find myself often balancing between two extremes. And I think that there's a time in which I really lean into this, like, there's nothing I do to earn God's grace. God's grace is given freely. God's grace is given abundantly. And yes, 100% true. And I still believe that. But then I'm also balanced by this idea that what we do matters. And what we do matters. The way we advocate for people matters. The way we treat others, the way we treat ourselves, it does matter. And so this passage kind of, although I don't understand it, I do think that there's this overarching idea that, like, I think we can really put ourselves in any part of this, right? We can be the servant. We can be the person being invited. We can be the person who didn't wear the right clothes. But, like, I really hope this makes sense. What we do matters, and that saying yes to the invitation and showing up ready matters. I think especially when it comes to overthrowing systems of oppression. I'm constantly coming back to this idea that, like, saying yes to the call matters, showing up matters, being engaging and being ready matters. And so I feel in this parable there is a call to assess the way that you're showing up, and the way you're engaging with this invitation. And I think that I would say that that's my gospel implication, is just like a reflection on, yes, on our own actions, on the way that we're showing up. So I don't know if that resonated at all, but I'd say that that's probably my overarching kind of like gospel implication for this parable.
Thanks, Sydney. We're gonna have just a quick section to get Jenny better connected, and then I will give mine. Okay, so my gospel implication is okay. So in general, what I think this our challenges and our struggle with this story is that it can be read in a very fearful and hostile way. And fearful and hostile religion has not borne a lot of good fruit. Fearful and hostile religion is what ends up leading to genocide and really just terrible judgments against people and suicides when we um, indict people and kind of feed their shame and their guilt. And so my question is, where is, if God's character is loving and abounding in this steadfast love, like where do we see God's character in this story? And I wonder if some of it has to do with the fact that growth always comes from that place of discomfort. And if the time that this is being written and the discomfort that is going on in this kind of post resurrection ascension world is interpreting this kind of discomfort and growth as like apocalyptic terribleness because we haven't gone through and gotten to the other side. So like things that are happening during the time that Matthew is being written is that like it's believed that this is after the temple has been destroyed. So this evidence of like God's presence, this holy of holies place is wiped out. So some of understanding God's presence and God's goodness and affirmation is very hard, I think, for the people at this time. And so I wonder if there really is more to this word friend. How did you get in without a wedding robe? I wonder if there is more invitation in those words, not of indictment, which is, I think, what we hear literally happening in the passage, but in the overarching understanding of who God is, that these words of indictment are these invitations of saying, friends, I want you to enjoy the feast. Like, it's really good. Like, I've like cooked up the best food. There's going to be tons of people there. We're celebrating the person that I love dearly. I want you to be there. And I wonder if there is some sort of loving invitation in that act of preparation and getting prepared and being ready to hear and partake and be a part of that goodness. So I guess I don't necessarily hear it in the passage specifically, but my hope is that what we're supposed to do with this passage, or how we're supposed to live out this passage, is an invitation to celebrate, to grow in deeper relationship with Jesus, with each other, to be able to see God's goodness. So that's kind of where I am hoping that God is working. That's what I'm going to take away from it, at least. Jenny, but what about you? What was your gospel implication? Hey, Jenny, we can't hear you. Let me pause our recording and see if we can get your volume going and we'll start it up again.
So my gospel implication of that is that the king represents God, the wedding, and all the feast that's gonna happen in the wedding. It represents all the good things that God has for us. And then also for people out there, we're invited. Everyone is welcome. Everyone that wants to have God in their life is welcome. So I guess the servants represent the people that spread the gospel in a way. People that talk to people about God and all the good things He has to offer to us. And then us, we are the people that we're invited, and we have a choice to make. Many people don't want to, and many people do want to. So I guess it just represents who wants to be as a people. It goes back to the feeling concept. I guess at the end, God is inviting us into His peace, and it's up to us if we want to go. But we should, because He has a lot of good things to offer to us.
Thanks, Jenny. Well, thank you all for this discussion and this tough passage. And I'm going to close us in a word of prayer and invite y'all to go out and see God's goodness everywhere you go. So, God, thank you so much for the ways in which the conversation we can have, the wrestling that we do together can bring about the Spirit, can bring about the illumination of scriptures and continue to make them living and active ways that we might be able to encounter you in your presence. And I just pray that you would work through this difficult passage, that it can bear within us good fruit, that it can help us to find out how to encounter the King, how to encounter the good things that you have for us, and that we might be able to think deeply about how we see others who receive this invitation. I pray that you will be with each one of us to protect us and bless us as we go into the coming week. We ask all these things in your holy name. Amen. Blessings, friends. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.